what makes the great great?
Well, they're all different. Obviously, a Nick Raleigh, a Brian Panish, a Keith Mitnick, a Joe Freed. Very different demeanors, very different personalities. But what they have in common is A, they try a lot of cases. And so if you try a lot of cases and you study trial, you're going to get superior trial strategy. And that is very important. How you tell the story, the sequence and ordering of witnesses, how you frame the opening statement and the closing argument is critical. But the one thing that that they have in common that really can't be taught is that they all really focus on their connection with the jury, and they all have different abilities to connect. And somebody that is like Nick Rowley. If you watch him on CBN, he's a very, 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 very very good at it. He's a super connector. Whereas somebody like Brian Panish, he's a great connector too, but it just takes a little bit longer because he's just not as warm and friendly until you get to know him. Like when you get to know him, he's one of the greatest guys I've ever met. But until I got to know him, I thought he was very gruff and just not very friendly. But so when the jury gets to know him after a week or two, then they can connect with them. So sometimes, but they focus on their connection because it's all about the connection with the jury. And so, if he, I think Brian knows he's just not, as warm and bubbly. That's not him. So his trials tend to take a little bit longer for the jury to get to connect with him and get to know him and get comfortable with him. But they all focus on their connection with the jury because that is the whole game. Because, everybody's got the evidence. I mean, to different degrees. If you don't get kicked out of court on a directed verdict, you have evidence to win the case. You just have to have the connection because a jury, because I said to Joe Freed, I said, it doesn't matter what story you're telling if nobody's listening, if you're not connected. And he said, Dan, and the inverse is true. It doesn't matter what story you're telling if you are connected because a jury is going to find the facts to support your case because they want you to win. And that's just all there is to it. So it's all connection.
So let's go deeper here because this is new to me. This is a different point of conversation on this connection. And what are some of the micro steps here? What are some of the micro steps? Does it start in, where does it start? To start building this connection. And again, you said, hey, Nick Raleigh, he does this kind of naturally. It's really quick. Brian, he takes more time to develop, and then they have that, and they both get it. They come about it differently. But what are some of the micro steps for the trial attorneys listening, the PI attorneys listening? What could really help them here?
Well, I call them really the micro skills. So the micro skills of connection are appropriate eye contact. And that's the ability to, learn how to connect in people's eyes really quickly and then keep coming back and kind of keep ramping it up until you're having a 3-minute conversation with them. But you have to let them get comfortable looking you in the eye. Controlling the pacing and pausing of your voice is critical. If you ever listen to audiobooks, they speak very slowly. They pause frequently because their only medium of teaching and communication is the voice. Most great trial lawyers are very cognizant of their speech patterns, and it's important to speak slowly, to pause frequently, because what it does is allows your audience to process the information. People that speak very rapidly and don't pause appropriately, they leave no time for the mind of the audience to process the information, and then eventually the listener gets worn down because they can't process the information quickly enough, and they stop listening because they're exhausted. So that was clearly an example of that. And I found from training that people of higher intelligence speak more rapidly, just unconsciously, because they're processing at the same speed, with being completely unaware that their audience may not have their Mensa IQ and are not processing at the same speed. So speech patterns, facial expressions, learning how to smile authentically or to look concerned, or whatever you want the jury to feel, because it doesn't matter how I feel or any particular lawyer feels. It only matters how do you want the jury to feel in that moment. And to be able to control your facial expressions is everything. And people are like, it's like acting. Okay, well, or it is acting, frankly. And, but great acting comes from inside, right? It's living the role. And the difference between an actor and a trial lawyer is a trial lawyer has to actually connect with the audience. An actor has just to connect with the part and the other actor. Being a trial lawyer is a lot more like being a stand-up comedian. You have your set scripts or shtick, what you want to say, but you have to be able to riff or flow with the audience and connect to your audience and make sure they're getting it. So, that ability, to control the facial expressions is critical. The hand gestures. People, we use our hands naturally when we talk as human beings. But when people get up there in front of a jury and they get all in their head and the tension starts, it's like their arms sometimes become paralyzed, or they do weird shit like grip their hands and make these little fists next to them, and or just it's the weirdest stuff. But most lawyers, when they stand up, their hands are like this, which is ridiculous to me, because the only time your hands are, I'm doing this on the Zoom so you can see it, but like this is if, Chris, you're in a lot of effing trouble with me and I'm really upset with you. If your hands are just jumping like this and you have these two things in the audience's lower peripherals distracting you. Whereas if you want to connect with one person, then you should turn a little bit to the side and keep your hand and learn to move your hand with the rhythm of your voice and keep it a couple inches below your chin. So that way it's like besides the eyes, the face, the voice connecting, now you have a visual like beacon almost to bring them into your face. Because when your hand's moving, it's constantly saying, come on, come follow me, when it's moving with the rhythm of your voice. But it takes a lot of practice. And not only draws in that one particular listener, but it draws in the listeners, the other jurors who are around them, because you have all this, you're hitting so many sensory perceptions with them. And so, like even like, the ability, like, okay, as we've all just heard, like this is an inclusive move that includes you, the lawyer. Whereas like, does this make sense to everybody? And you do this kind of, I call it Jesus hands. Well, that's inclusive of everybody except the lawyer, the speaker. Because if it makes sense to you, well, you would, obviously it makes sense to you. You're the speaker. If what you're saying doesn't make sense to you, then, then you're in trouble, basically. So, the learning of hand gesticulation, how to control where the jury looks. Like if I want you all to look at, hey, I want to look at my picture on my phone, but if I look back at the jury just because I'm insecure, now they all look into my eyes and they don't look at where I want them to. So I can control where they look. And so there's just some of the, that's a few of them. There's obviously listening. Listening is the bridge. The jury listening to you, and that's why you have to, demonstrate to the jury that you're listening to them by occasionally repeating back what, a juror says to a different juror, kind of paraphrasing it, so that it was like, oh, I'm listening. Oh, I made that particular juror feel important. I mean, that's just natural communication. But, and you listening, really listening to the jury. So many lawyers don't listen because they have tension and they're thinking, where am I going? Where am I going? Where am I going? Not being present right here. And so those are some of the skills that are critical, but it's critical to practice these skills too. Like people don't practice. Lawyers are it's the craziest thing. Like they just think they're going to not do a trial for a year or two and go into court and it's all going to come back to them. That's insane. I think being a great trial lawyer is sort of like being a martial artist, because you have to coordinate so many things. Your eyes, your voice, your face, your hands, and you have to remember what you want to say because words matter, and you have to look like you're not trying at all, or else you'll look stiff, right? And the only way you get there is to practice. Yet, lawyers want to practice and learn to be trial lawyers by just going to lectured seminars and listening to lawyers speak. Or watching videos on CBN. That's like trying to teach a kid how to ride a bike, and you show him a picture of a video of a guy riding a bike. Go ride, and the kid's like, "That's crazy. I could fall, right? I'm not going to go ride." Or like trying to learn how to play tennis by watching videos of tennis, or just going to play, and not taking the time to learn how to hold the racket correctly. Learn get lessons, have a coach, do 1,000 forehands with adjusting it every time, backhand, serving, footwork, all the fundamental basic skills that make up any complex skill that if anybody ever wants to be good at anything, they get a coach. They practice, and they practice if you want to become world class.